Well, it is the second day of the third week of the LCS with coverage brought to you by Alienware. I'm joined right now by Fifflaren, who is the VP of Esports at Dignitas. So, first off, do you go by Fifflaren in the league world? Because I know a lot of people might be familiar with you from other esports, but people might not know your name here.
I think I use both. I think I use Robin a little bit more in the official stance, but I think in the gaming world, I think Fifflaren, obviously Fiff or Fiffy, you can kind of tell if it's a player talking to you or like a staff or a coach. They tend to just go by nicknames. Versus, let's say I meet someone new, obviously I wouldn't go and be like, "Hey, I'm Fifflaren." Very much use my real name then.
Very good. Well, regardless, it is good to chat with you. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background? Because I think a lot of league people might be familiar with Michael Prindeville, who obviously was the face of the Dig leadership for quite some time. I did a big interview with him whenever Dig came back into the league. But people might not be familiar with you if they haven't followed other esports.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if I were to go on a quick little rant here, I've been in esports since 2005. Is when I went pro in Source. Competed in Source for 5 years. Retired. This is around the CGS era for the people that is old school. Travis probably knows. When that essentially, went to crap. Essentially, I told myself that, hey, listen, esports is very volatile, and I need to figure out what I need to do in my future, right? If I can't be playing the games anymore. So I essentially, took a step back, did some other stuff for 2 years, and then went back to being pro when CS:GO came out in 2012. In which I think this is where people now start to know me a little bit more. I think if you're very much old school, I used to be very good in Source, I'd argue, but when CS:GO first came out, I got a chance to join the, I guess, legendary NIP at that time, known for major champion. Have still the record to this day with 87 and 0 in terms of map wins offline at offline events. And after that, honestly, yeah, been a pillar of the scene, I would argue, for CS:GO. After I retired at the end of 2014, I stepped in and did a lot of talent work. So I've covered most of the majors. I've covered everything there is to cover for CS:GO, both as a player but also as talent. 2015 is really when I moved over to the States. I got a job at Twitch and I was leading the CSGO efforts there. Obviously, Twitch live streaming was a little bit newer back then. I think that the argument was made there of, as a player, when we talk about how do we make these guys profiles, I think that I found myself in a spot where I just had a lot of experience being a former player. And I think I knew kind of, what we should be doing in the future with Twitch to kind of get more people involved and interested. So I ran there. We did ECS is one of the products that we did for Twitch Esports. This is now Flashpoint. RLCS is also a Twitch product that my team was there and helped create
Rocket League,
together
yeah.
with Psionics. Yeah, Rocket League, which is their their tournament essentially, RLCS. But yeah, and then just to fast forward some more, 2019 hits. And I get to a point where I really want to come back to the esports space a little bit more, where I feel like when I retired in CS, I really wanted to see if I could coach and if I could develop players. Then I really want to come back into that space to see what I could do with that. And obviously being in North America, it was a North American team that I had my eyes set to initially. I think I can talk about it more now because it's a little bit further in, but it was the current EG roster that I was very interested in potentially having a chance to coach. But time goes on, and I get this chance essentially to join Dignitas as the general manager and the head coach for the CS:GO team, and I accept it. And this happened last year. I was there for 8 months essentially until then. Where we're currently at right now, which I'm getting this offer for VP of Esports, overseeing all of our teams for all of Dignitas, not just the CS:GO aspect of it. And that's what I've been doing for the past, I think, 6 months now. And it kind of came into play roughly around the same time as the transfer window happened for LCS, which is why when we talk about my involvement with League, for example, I've been very involved as of late in trying to get to a good spot with the org and with League, all things related.
So how did you approach the off season, especially because your background not in League of Legends? Obviously, I'm sure you followed it and are familiar with it, but that's a far cry, right, from then being in a situation where it's like, okay, you got to build a roster, go, and especially under such a high pressure because you have these tiny, as you said, this window. It's like this small time to actually make it all work. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny. I'm always very interested in how other teams do when it comes to their team building efforts. You make the argument, right? That like, yeah, I was in CS:GO, but for me, the argument is that this is still gaming, and this is still where we are putting five, young adults on the server together, and we're expecting them to showcase results. And I think that when I got a chance, then jumping into league, if you look at our team that as it was last year, I think the biggest thing for me, what I come from with my background is I need people that wants to work together. I need people that is bought into the system, and that it comes from the fact of having the buy-in from the players, but also the coaching staff. So during that transfer window, if you look at our former team, I think I had a decision there quite early to make of do we keep the players or do we keep the coaching staff and do we build around them? And obviously you can kind of tell with the announcement that we made, right, with Dardoch being announced first, that we ended up going for the players instead and trying to rebuild with that mentality in play. And again, I'm going back to my background as a player. The biggest thing for me, and we talk about players and we talk about their involvement. I was always the captain. I was always the in-game leader. I was always the guy that was calling the shots on the server, even if Exist was there as well. Like I was always in that position where I had a lot of say with what we wanted to do. So that was very interesting to me when we then looked into league, because I think I even read or I heard Bjergsen in that TSM interview when he said, "Oh, I never got to pick players when I was a player. That's only really something I used to do now when I was a coach." And that system for me is I don't buy into that. My buy-in is very much like I need to find a coach that understands what we want to do, that wants to win with the piece that he has. It's not about having $30 million and getting the best players for each lane. It's about building with the piece that you have, and winning as a team and losing as a team. And I think that mentality is really something that I am really coming into here with. I don't think that is a North American mentality. I think North American mentality is a lot of I want to win the game for my team, versus I think European mentality is more so of like I just want to win the game, even if I'm performing poorly. I win as a team, I lose as a team. And it might be upbringing, it might be something like that, but I just get the sense for Europeans just have that teamwork environment a little bit more so compared to like North America. So that was super interesting to me, obviously. Then, so it comes into like keeping Dardoch and then keeping Aframu. I think it's really self-explanatory, especially the Aframu piece. With I think he just has a proven track record of developing talent and building talent. And I think the one I guess that everyone is question marking about is Dardoch. And Dardoch is for me was super interesting. It was one of the pieces that I came in and Michael asked me about this guy when I got this role, and the thing that I said was that when you have a player like that, is when you have a very outspoken player, you come in and you put him in as the last piece of the puzzle, you will not do it will not be a good time. It's essentially I use the example of, let's say you have a party, right, and you have four guys in a party, and you have a guy that knocks on the door, and he has the drinks and stuff, but he comes in, but he's rowdy, right? The guy's gonna be like, "Well, who's this guy? Like, I don't want him. Like, get him out of my party, right? Like, get him out of here, right?" But if he's the first one there and he's the one that starts the party, when the four guys comes to knock on the door, they can't ask him to leave, right? He's there. It's his party. That's it's a weird mindset, right? But it's very much of like getting the buy-in of like saying that of like we know for a fact that he's an outspoken guy. We know for a fact that he knows how he likes to play the game. We need to figure out how we can find the pieces to work with him in which how we can accomplish that. And that role goes with the after moves of being a little bit more lenient, of being able to develop players, but it also goes into the coaching staff, into saying like, hey, listen, we know we have good pieces. We just need someone to figure out how we work with this on a personal level, not just more so at the in-game level, but how do we get these guys to actually, feel like they're teammates, or how to actively get to a point where like, hey, yeah, listen, we have this rowdy guy, but he's the older brother, right? He's the one that is calling out the bullshit because he just wants us to win. He knows we can do better, and that's really what we try to nurture this year in Dig.
So that sort of explains why you guys launched with Dardoch as that first piece, because I think, as you said, a lot of people were skeptical on it, but I see what you mean. Where for you guys the philosophy was like, let's start with him and then build around that. So
Yes, it was intentional, right? Because here's the thing for me when we think about League of Legends or like even the scene in general, you have 10 LCS teams, which means that there's 10 spots per lane. And for example, teams to keep on picking up players that honestly don't want to be here, or you don't have the buy-in, or for example, they're just here to collect a paycheck. I don't want any of that. When you talk about, there's only 10 spots, you make the argument of there's always going to be the one person that wants to play the game, right? He might not be as good, but if you have the buy-in and he's like, oh man, I want to play LCS, I want to be pro and I want to learn, right? I want to develop, then we are the place for you, right? And that's really the mentality that we've had. And it was on purpose then, right? Because I think Dardoch has had a lot of history, right? Like team number 7 and whatever. And I think that as soon as you even mention his name, I think a lot of people just, get cautious, right? But, oh no, I've heard bad things, so I don't want to join that team, right? I don't want to do that. It's up to us to kind of sell them on that fact, but same idea there, right? Like, I lean on the players here. I lean on Dardoch in some sense, to kind of help me there, right? Of like, hey, listen, if let's talk about it, right? Let's get to a point where we talk about the players. Let's get to a point where we're all on the same page, right? We understand what's to come, right? And there's no question marks. It shouldn't be a case either where we have, a player when they come up day 2 and they say, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to play anymore, right? Like, you don't have the buy-in initially, and you kind of get to a sense, right? Again, where I go into of there's 10 spots. It shouldn't be, yeah, we're here for you. We're here for you to help you compete, but we want you to be here at the same time. And I feel like that mentality has kind of gotten away a little bit. We talk about academy, especially as well, of like, I call it, it's a place where veterans go to die, but it's supposed to be development. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be a place where we develop players and we figure out a way in which we can kind of help develop that where we keep using our veterans.
Yeah.
And it's a start, yeah, but it was definitely intentional for sure.
I think there's some question for me also, and I know you can't speak numbers, but what the situation you were in was like for building out a team, because we saw, I mean, teams like Golden Guardians, for instance, were pretty candid in the fact that, like, hey, COVID hit the Warriors' business, and that meant that we perhaps could not do what we wanted to do, and plans changed in that. They went very development, right? On the other hand, you have like the long-term endemics, for like LCS endemics, like C9 and TL, who went big during the offseason, TSM. So where was Dig? What kind of pieces were you dealing with, and sort of how did the situation that Dignitas found itself in, especially being associated with an NBA team, how did that impact your ability to go about building the way you wanted to?
Um, I think you always have the question about budget, right? In the sense of like, what do we have to build around? I think the thing for me has always been like, I've always felt like, the buyouts are extremely, they're way too high, right? And when you have that, and then you have salaries that are way too high as well. I'll give you an example, right? Look at the CS:GO talent that, moved over now to Valorant. These guys did not make a lot of money, right? They go in and they increase by over 400% right off the bat, right? You make the argument there that something happened in the middle, where maybe, when we talk about a player, yeah, he's good on the server, but for me, he also needs to, when you talk about what difference like a Bjergsen, right, compared to, another player that's just good. Like Bjergsen has a brand, right? Bjergsen actually thinks about that, and he conducts himself in that way. And I think with that, you do increase that value. I think that when we then take a step back and we look at Dig, COVID related or whatnot, I think it comes back to just the mindset that I want to do of like seeing the piece that we had, because I saw it again. It's not just a League of Legends problem that North America has. It's a broader problem that I feel like there's not a lot of patience in what we're trying to accomplish, and I feel like we want to get results now versus getting results long term. And the thing for me then, when I say, well, listen, I can have one development roster right this year, right, but why does that matter if next year I'm going to go and just pick up 5 guys again and won't do development? That's never the concept for me, right? I think that the idea for Dignitas here is very much like seeing the faults and thinking long term, and understanding that the development, and that we can put the fault elsewhere, right? But just very clear, right, that North American development, or even league in general, has been pretty stagnant in terms of what we have. And for the people that do show up, and for the people that does end up blowing up, same idea there, right? You have then the big orgs that just throwing money at these guys, and yeah, they will get them, but where's the other guys? Where are the guys that maybe were ranked 5, that wasn't good enough for the top 3 teams, but had the mental state of saying, I want to get better, I need some time, how do I get there? I think a lot of cases we give a player 2-3 months expecting them to just turn it around and just to expect to learn. As a former player myself, this is where I think I come in with that experience of saying like, listen, this takes time to build a team. It takes time to build communication and team efforts and aspects of things. Even the game today we saw we lost versus C9. You can make the argument of like, listen, we could be the best team in the league understanding wise, but even for me, when I'm watching the games as a not very good League of Legends player and I still see the mistakes, you make the argument of like, that's fantastic news because that is development. That's still stuff that we can learn. We're not stagnant in the sense of like, this is just it, right? I am very much thinking, very much long term here. How do we get to a point where we don't win a world championship this year, but how do we get to a point where we can actually proudly say that North American has talent that can go and win a world championship? Why make excuses that we can't win? We need imports. No, we have to build from the ground up.
And here we are.
I know I caught it. Yeah,
you said it. You said the word. Okay, so I mean, here's what's interesting to me is that you in the press conference, you said something similar to this. And people can go check it out. It should be on my channel by the time this goes live. And Golden Guardians also did kind of this thing where they waffled around it, where it sounded like they're like, maybe we don't need this rule, but like kind of went along with it anyway. So as an outsider in all this, I look at it and it's like, it's really weird where it feels like all the 10 teams are presenting somewhat of a united front on they want to see changes to the import rule. They want the import rule lifted. But then you have teams like yourself and Golden Guardians who are out there saying like, we don't think that's going to fix it. And also North American talent is great. We should do things for North American talent. So I'm trying to reconcile that a little bit in my head and understand how it is that like Dig can be positioning themselves both as like, let's look at this rule, let's look to changes, but also who needs this, why do we need to do that anyway, So I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to figure out.
Yeah, so here's the thing for me, right? Because this conversation was never in the ballpark last year when we built this team, right? So when we built this team, I think that when you look at it, it just on a whim happened that we are the only North American, only org that has 5 North American pieces on the roster. I mean, It was somewhat intentional, but in some sense, it wasn't also. Like the intent for me was always to figure out where the pieces that I needed, existed. So to give you an example, right? Like if I have 3 North American development players on my team, and let's say, for example, I don't know, I don't have one of my veteran players anymore. Like I would make the argument of like, hey, maybe because I know I need a team aspect, I need someone that buys into the system, and I know that that's what Europe gives me. Maybe then the argument would be, I would love to get one European player, right, to help me develop these North American talents. My mentality is the same thing. You flip that as well, and you say, like, listen, if I can't do that on a player end, I can do that on a coaching end, right? Like I'm obviously a European, right? If you think about it, then, I used to be a coach at the same time, and you make the argument, if I don't have that ability, then obviously my next step would be I would get European coaches, right? Or like for me right now, right, like I am a European manager. In some sense, right? Like trying to build this around. And I think it does hold its strengths and values there too. So like, it's more so like when we talk about, for me, for import, it was never about, getting talent over here to help us win. It was more so like, I want to figure out a way where we get to a good spot where we are still, showcasing the talent that we have in all of the regions, right? But we're still improving the teams by picking up, 1-2 good players, for example, that makes sense.
So and I will point out, you can pick up 1 or 2 players from other regions right now within the current. Yeah. So that's my confusion, right? Is it your model?
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
So we didn't do, so to your point, right? We didn't do so we had that choice, right? But I think it comes back to as well, right? When I said, with the role that I have right now, and we have to consider as well my other coaching staff, right? We have James as the director of esports and performance. He's also a former pro. He's also European, right? So like when we talk about that and we talk about, when I think that I like the fact that there should be a rule where, to your point, right? Like there should always be a case where we can get an import, but like it shouldn't be a case where we don't utilize the North American talent, which is what I was getting at. So to your point here, right? I feel like I found myself in a world where I could build myself a North American team, and I felt good about building that. But let's say that there was, for example, an Oceanic player, or like a Brazilian player, or like a European player that I felt like, man, this guy is exactly what I need, right? He's a good talker, he's a leader of the team, right? And that's what I needed. I would have loved to pick that guy up, right? Because he would have made my team better. With the same intent though, right? That I'm still developing North American talent, as you see in Academy as well.
But you could do that right now.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my confusion. Again, just kind of going back to it, it's like you want to be able to pick up, like, hey, if you can pick up one or two good European players that can help come in, develop, do all this stuff. The model right now allows you to do something like that. That is why I continue to be confused as to why do we need changes? If this, for
Oh,
instance,
okay. So
is
here,
fitting Dignitas's goal right now, then why would you need 3 or 4 or 5 Europeans or Koreans or Chinese players?
here's something for an outside view, right? And it's the same thing for me, right? As someone that I obviously moved to the States 2015, right? So you can make the argument of, I am a European, right? So if I were to start playing the game tomorrow, am I an import or am I, a non-import? Very much the same thing. And I think the problem persisted when the grandfather rule changed, because you make the argument for me, right? A Bjergsen, a Jensen, right? For me, they're non-imports. They've been in here for like
Yeah.
they played their whole career here. And I think when you have there, because you make the argument, we have a team right now that is filled with 5 non-imports. But then when you have the other teams and you make the same argument that you just made, oh, but you can still do that right now. You can only have 2 imports. I think that the fault was that you still have former players that is within this grandfathered rule, and they kind of removed that rule, and you kind of created
Yeah,
this
they
like
changed it to this to green card system. Do you not feel like the situation where like a player can obtain residency through a green card, for instance, or whatever? Do you not feel like that is good enough? Because in some sense, it might actually make it faster, right? Because I think at one point in time, and I don't know how much you know the back history on it, because you were winning money in CS:GO, but like it was like 2 years, and then it became 4 years of residence of competing in the league, and then they're like, actually, if you just get a green card, you can get a green card much faster than 4 years now, right? So in a sense, like the new model theoretically, and it's obviously more bureaucratic and all that stuff, that allows you to field more imported players quicker than the old model where you had to wait till somebody had been in the league for 4 years before they started to count.
Yes, and here's where, and exactly to your point, and I think that's where in that call that we had on the interview that we had, that's what I said. Like, I feel like people are taking words in our mouths, because I think when you talk about import, I think that there's a lot of options here. I think there's a lot of stuff that people might not be considering. Of like, yeah, you might have one idea here, but I do think that there's more ideas that's being funneled into the whole piece. Like, the other piece of this whole thing is when you talk about this whole rule, and I wouldn't really put this on the org side. It's more stuff like the scene itself, right? Like, if you look at this elsewhere, is if you have this big piece of the franchise in LCS, what feeds under it? And we saw that this year they are trying to make changes to the amateur and also academy, and I think it has a tie into it, right? Because I think right now the short term is we are not good enough right now. We want better players, right? Long term is, well, if we don't develop North American talent and we don't have the buy-in from Riot and we don't have the buy-in from all the other people, this will be a problem, and it will continue to be a problem. Like, importing players won't fix that problem. So like, I think that we have 2 problems in our hand, and I think that a lot of people are talking about this import rule as it's trying to fix the both problems. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that it fixes 2 separate problems. But I agree. I would like, listen, I would love to find a way, right, where we are keeping up with the North American development. We have a nice structure here as well with the right, with amateur leading into it, right? Like, we keep on putting in money there, right? And same on the orgs level, right? I think you still have to have the buy-in from the orgs of saying like, hey, we obviously is a North American league and we want to produce North American talent. That should be a benefit to you, right? So like, when you say that and you say for a team like Dig, we love the fact that we're a North American org. You know what I mean? We eat that shit up. We want to keep doing that. We want to keep being the org for the people, then, in some sense, right? Because I think it then falls into the management group of myself and saying like, hey, even if that rule is removed, there's not the sense that I just can't keep on, to your point, right? Keep on producing 5 North American talent in LCS, even if that rule is
Yeah,
removed or not.
I think that there's kind of a lack of trust that if owners are saying, well, we want it to be completely removed, but we'll never use it in a way where you could just get 5 players brand new from the previous year. It's kind of like, why remove it entirely, right? So to get back to what you were saying a second ago, and I don't want to go into too much of a meta conversation about the conversation, but I think this is where a lot of the breakdown has occurred. In that you said, you kind of feel like people are putting words in mouths. The problem is, the only word that we had really was Jack and Steve, who had both been on the record saying they just wanted it removed. Then you had Nicole and Trisha, who also said they just wanted it removed. and then you had like Andy, I think, had made some statements somewhere in like a Twitch chat, or the way he tends to do, and so there was no like that is I think part of what I would like to see is like an open conversation, and where maybe the opinions of Team Liquid and C9 do not represent the opinions of Dignitas on this topic, but it's like I'd love to know what Dignitas's stance is. Like when you guys go into these meetings, is it, oh, actually, we just like to see the grandfather thing come back, and like after a player has been in North America for 2 years, then they count as a North American resident? Or I think that's part of the problem is just there's not enough really information or understanding or transparency for the audience and the pundits like myself or whoever to understand what is actually being talked about and what is at stake.
Yeah, so I think to your point, I think we're all in agreement, right, that we want to have it changed. And I think as it stands right now, I think that everyone just wants to be flexible. They have ideas, right? It's the same thing. I can ask you, hey, Travis, what do you like to see, right? If you were to list that and you're in the public, people would see like, oh, and then the right comes up with something else. People would be like, Travis, what's this? Like, I thought that you thought this, but like, yeah, it's not in your control, right? So like, it's more so like we obviously give ideas as well, and we want to try and improve the conditions. And I think that when you then talk about an import rule, I think that it's pretty clear, right? Everyone wants to see it changed in some way or another. And I think right now it's all about, figuring out a way what makes sense, right? Like, I think if it's if it's a ruling between having 0 imports versus having all imports, if that's the only 2 options that we have, I think we should look into that, right? But I don't think that's the only. I don't think we only have two.
Do you have like in your mind an idea of what you would like to see?
If this was my decision, right, and coming in from the outside, it's very much the same thing. I love the fact that we have a way where we can keep on developing North American talent, and we are improving the teams by having some form of imports, right? It doesn't necessarily entail all of them, but I still want to figure out if you remove that place, and that's what I mean with the whole thing with developing players, right? Like, I think you don't solve the problem by just removing it. I think you still have to ask yourself a lot of questions into how are we conducting ourselves if this were to happen? What are the changes that will happen if this were to be removed, right? Like, what are the additional support that will be taking place if this happens, X, Y, Z? And I fall back to it. Academy and amateur is a great start. We'd love to see more of that. That's really how you get to a point where we start, to develop North American talent.
I think it's just tough because, for instance, like I think Jack and Steve both said, well, we want the import, or basically said they want the import rule gone, but then they want to see more investment into academy and amateur. And it's just really hard because it feels like those are pulling in 2 separate directions. Like, okay, you want the ability to bring in 5 players from a completely different region, fresh, that have never played here before, and potentially win an LCS finals. But then you're also saying you want to, pour more money into developing talent. It's like, it feels at odds with each other, right? It's like, it feels like you're saying the amateur academy part just so that you can get people to approve your ability to bring in 5 players and start winning finals. So I think that's the problem, right? It's like it's weird to say, well, we can still develop more and we want to do more academy and amateur stuff, while also saying you feel like the answer to winning might be just importing, a lot of players, and that the current rule might hold us back in that.
Yeah, but for me, as a former player, it's a cop out, right? It's the same thing. If we look at, just to give you an example, right? Look at the Swedish scene in CS:GO. It used to be the best scene ever, right?
Yeah.
You ask the players there right now, what has happened to that scene? There was no development. The top tiers did not pick up the players, right? They did not try and develop them, and all of a sudden you had these 10 great names, and you had no development pieces. So then what happened a few years down the line is, they're not as competitive anymore, right? But then you compare to other regions that is saying like, hey, development matters, like Denmark, right? Perfect example of that, where you have a fully fledged system, right, that you are producing talent, and you are getting to a point long term where you say like, hey, listen, we want to win with the piece that we have, and that's the mentality that I have for North America, right? North America is a big country, right? There's a lot of people here, and I think that I don't like the excuse when they say like there's not enough talent here, right? I would argue that maybe we're not nurturing the talent. Maybe we're not, getting to a point where we are actually, can actively put these guys, in the LCS. One of the things that I've noticed, C9, I think, is the one org, maybe you can correct me, that I think has tried that with like their academy model and like maybe not guaranteeing a spot into LCS, but I think that they've had a really good retention rate there of like, converting players into like picking up the pieces. I think that, to your point here, that should be really the lean that we look into, right? Like long term and stuff like that. And I do think on a Dignitas level that's really something we excel at, right? Like if you were to compare to the C9s and Team Liquids and stuff, I think people have to be honest with themselves as well and kind of make the argument of like, listen, we're not a C9, we're not a Liquid. We have to be ourselves. We have to be unique. And for me, I love building pieces from the ground up. I love being the guy that people say like, listen, people, they had us as ranked 10 coming into the split, right, with the piece that we have with 3 development. And I think that if you compare our team even to other teams in the LCS right now, you make the argument that we have a very cheap team, right, because it's development pieces. And then I make the argument, why, to your point, why do I need other talent when I'm currently winning with 5 North American players? Yeah. And it's all about, and you talked about it too, of like the trust aspect of things, right? And I think maybe that's where I come in as the new kid on the block. I have always had the mentality of, when it comes to, with building my teams, when it comes to me being on a desk, when it comes to stuff, I want to be honest with the fans. I want to be honest with what's happening. I want to be honest with what's happening with us. And I think the first video you saw from us for Dignitas this year with James and Michael, it kind of lead into that a little bit more, right? And so like essentially what I'm saying here, right, is like, to my point, right, there are 2 separate problems. The import is one of them, but I think the other problem for me, right, is as well is I love developing talent. I love, putting that on me and saying like, listen, I understand that this is a bad shape. Let me try and prove people wrong, right? And let's try and get to a good spot. And I think that this is exactly what we're doing this year, and we will be continuing to do so for the future as well.
Well, I know we've gone back and forth on this a ton, and we've now been talking, I think, for over half an hour. So I know even you and I had talked a little bit about some of the developer stuff and all that. So hopefully we can get you on an episode of Hotline League, because obviously there's like a lot to talk about here, and I saw you on the Twitch chat before. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. Is there anything you want to say to any of the Dignitas fans out there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, thank you so much for obviously having me. I would, as you can tell, I'm a talker, right? So I would love to be on the show. I'm sure that your audience will have a lot of questions for me as well. And like I said, right, I think there's probably going to be stuff that I can't answer, right? But, I really want to come in here and, with the mindset of like, I think this is a new dig this year, right? And, especially me coming in here, like I think I've had a lot of experience in the past with orgs. You can check that out. I am very much on a player end. As far as dig, as far as here, I think that, listen, I think we've done a fantastic job this, the first 6-7 weeks here of this year. I think that the coaching staff that we've built with Jimmy and Maybury and Jim has been absolutely fantastic. As for the team, I think, everyone's just happy of the fact that people are paying more attention. They're asking more questions, and at least they're looking at us a little bit more. Like, we're not just a washed up team that people just assume that's just going to finish 10th. I think that right now we have, the mindset that I am trying to give is, let's play our game, win or lose, right? Like, we'll get better as time goes along, but let's not get to a point where we remove our identity, because once that happens, then we're just not going to, keep producing. So thank you everyone for, for the support, and I hope that we'll continue to showcase some fun League of Legends, and, to really break the barriers here a little bit more, and to really just showcase, what it's like to be part of Dignitas. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for the talk. And again, thank you for sitting down and talking so extensively about so much of this. So I really hope people appreciate it. For everyone else, you can check out the rest of my coverage of all things LCS right here on my YouTube channel. Did you know that Alienware actually gives me a ton of free reign to say how I want to promote their products, and allows me to make really unique outros? And so I'm going to just say, by the way, you can go check out their stuff in the description, but I think they would not mind if I just took a little bit of a different tack this time and said, thank you to Alienware, but also, why don't you go, if you enjoyed this interview, tweet at the player that was in it and say something nice about something that you thought was interesting, or maybe something you've enjoyed about their play recently, because I think in the space that we are all in, sometimes it's a lot easier to criticize than to praise, and I don't know if people realize how nice it is to sometimes just see a nice message from somebody. So again, if you enjoyed this interview, or there was something that you thought was quite fun about it, go ahead and hit up the player and let them know. I'm sure they'd appreciate hearing you say that. Let's just go hit him up on Twitter or Instagram or anywhere else.